Now, I am pleased to welcome faculty member Jessica Kruger. Jessica is a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Community Health and Health Behavior. And I can tell you firsthand that Jessica has integrated many innovative teaching methods and technologies in her courses, including having her students author and publish an original open educational resource textbook for her course, Models and Mechanisms for Understanding Public Health. Last year, Jessica was named the recipient of the 2019 Excellence in Instruction Award from the SUNY Faculty Advisory Council on Teaching and Technology. So welcome, Jessica.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here with everyone today. It's been fantastic to learn about what everyone else is doing in their courses and really see it all come together, right? It really does take a village in order to transition to remote teaching. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about structure and flexibility. This is something that we've heard throughout these presentations. We've heard it's important to be flexible and understand where our students are coming from. And that can often be very confusing. There's structure, which is important to help move your course forward, but it's also important to be flexible because life happens. So I believe many of you can really feel this way or understand what it feels like if pre-pandemic, your course is really put together, everything's moving smoothly, you're used to teaching within the classroom. And online during a pandemic, it can seem like there are so many moving parts, whether it's different assessments, whether it's different types of styles of teaching, whether it's just shifting the whole thing and doing something completely new. I can tell you, I really felt this way. I was in a groove as we were moving through pre-pandemic world. Life was great. The courses were very much discussion-based. And then as we moved into the online world, it became a lot more challenging with so many moving parts and so many students. So my courses were set up much like many of your courses were set up. I teach 4 courses, one of which was online pre-pandemic. And so there was a lot of shifting. And within my courses, I had a number of sizes and levels. So I had a course as small as 17, and I had a course as large as 87 that semester. And so this really made me think about how I was going to instruct students and the variety in which I wanted to instruct students. So in some of my courses, I offered online synchronous sessions that were optional. And these were held once a week. And it's interesting because over half the class came to these optional sessions because they were so used to being part of this group and having this discussion. The students that couldn't come, well, a lot of them had other things that came up, whether it was working a job because they were an essential worker, or they had to take care of their children or other responsibilities. And so having an option and being flexible during these challenging times was really important for my students. Throughout each course, there were brief lecturettes. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the organization of the course, which goes into the structure, which we'll talk about throughout this. But I always included an introduction. And I think that module introductions or weekly introductions are a really great way to connect with your students, a great way to tell them what to expect and to have them think about how it connected to the information you presented the week before. All of these were in video and were closed captions, but were pretty short. I also recorded brief lectures. Now, my colleagues laugh that I can only do a session that's about 5 to 8 minutes long, but it's possible. It's very possible to keep these short. And within those, I like to include a few quiz questions to keep students engaged and have them think about the content. Furthermore, I had a variety of activities. And these activities varied weekly, so they could have a Padlet, a Flipgrid, a discussion board, or something else. I really wanted the students to continue to engage in that active learning and do a lot of active learning strategies. Furthermore, I included some YouTube videos, and these were helpful in helping to provide some variety and other explanations for the course content. Lastly, I wanted to really emphasize structure. This talk is all about structure and flexibility because I think the combination of both is critical. And I also included some check-ins. So all of this together really created my online courses. A little bit of synchronous optional sessions, a little bit of lecturettes, some assessments, informative assessments, some activities that they did throughout it, and then lastly, some of that supplemental material. So structure. I think it's important for students to understand how long it's going to take them to do something. And so in each of my modules, I included a checklist, and the checklist included times. Now, these were estimates, right? It could take someone 20 minutes to read this article, but in fact, it could take them less, maybe even 10 minutes. But this provided them an overview of the amount of time it would take them to move through the information within the course. And the students really, really like this because it's easy to see what you need to do, what's due, and how long it could possibly take. Another way to view structure, this was from my online summer course, so there's a lot of content within it. I created this schedule from Canva, in Canva. And anything that was bold was something that was due. It included the estimated time, what chapters were due. I included my student hours or my coffee with Kruger, which were my office hours, into my weekly schedule, along with any sort of summative assessments that they needed to do at the end of the week, like their summary writing assignments. So this really gave them an overview and an option to see, okay, there's all of this content that needs to be done. In this course, everything could actually be due on Sunday. In my other courses, I had things staggered that were due, and that is really up to you and how you want your students to move through your courses. But this just provides them a nice overview. So now that we know a little bit about structure, let's focus on the flexibility component. So all of us had to be really flexible when we moved into our online environment. And this includes working around your life and making sure that things are set up so that you're able to be attentive to your students. I actually switched all of my due dates from Sunday, which were traditionally the day which everything was due, Sunday at midnight, to actually having everything open till that next Monday. And that's when the start of the next week open. And the reason why is because I would be up all day Sunday replying to emails. And I think it's good to have some work-life balance. And by switching it to Monday, I was able to answer many of those emails on a work day. I still check my emails on Saturday and Sundays, but this seems to help with some of that email flow. I also started to rethink deadlines, and deadlines are something that can be a very contentious issue, right? We want students to understand that things are due at a certain time and that in life, sometimes deadlines are not changeable. Well, I agree with that philosophy in some ways, but in others I don't. Life happens. You can't guess when something is going to go wrong or your computer is going to crash or you have to help your family move. And so I instated a 2-day grace period for all of my assignments. Now, I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. That did not qualify for quizzes or for discussion boards because students needed to reply to other students within a specific time frame. But if 2 days wasn't enough, I also created a due date modification form. And this is if something major happened in your life, or you are taking 6 classes online and you've never done that before and you had to get a second job. So therefore, you could make your own due date on an assignment. And lastly, check-ins. It's so important to check in with your students, to let them know, to ask them how they are doing, and to actually modify your schedule based on that. If you have a lot of students that are struggling, that tells me that I either need to slow down the content delivery or I need to rethink what's going to be new next, because I want my students to learn. I don't want them to be in constant stress. And these check-ins really provide me some information on what's happening. So the 2-day grace period. Now, for most of us, let's be honest, we're probably still grading 2 days after something is due, especially if you have a large class. And so within my syllabi, I include this language. You can have it on all assignments besides quizzes and discussion boards. If you don't feel like you can meet the original deadline, you don't need to tell me what's happening. You can just use it, and you can use it as much as you need to. And so some days I have staggered assignments coming in, which is fine for me. Other people may not find that to be optimal for your grading system. But I feel like it really honors the student where they are and allows them to make some really important decisions on where they're going and how they're going to get there. Furthermore, the due date modification form. This was something that during the pandemic, I found to be incredibly helpful, especially as students had scaffolded assignments that began to add up if they were missing components. And so I made a simple Google form for students to add their name, the assignment title, and they got to pick the date when they turned it in. Now, the nice part is this Google form can go right into a spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet is easily trackable. So if you have 6 students who say they're going to turn something in 2 weeks after the deadline, you can sort that and you can figure out what and when students will be turning in those specific components or assessments within your course. Again, this is something that worked for me, and it really helps students to request an extension without feeling like they were failing in any sort of way. We all know the stress that happened during the pandemic, and I'm sure it's stressful to take multiple online courses. And so this really provided them that way out, or that way to make a change if they needed to. Check-in questions. I find these to be so helpful as I'm learning more about my students and as I'm learning about what's happening in their life. Many of our students in public health take a similar set of courses. And so I usually know when another faculty member has many assignments due, because the flurry of nervousness begins to bubble up. And by asking these questions, how are you? What's something that's good happening in your life? Students can really reflect on where they are and if they're stressed out or if something has happened. I also can use this to reach out to students. And so throughout the pandemic, I found out that some students had lost loved ones, that others were suffering from COVID themselves. And this provided them a nice way, instead of taking the time to have to email and really explain some of this, to check in as part of their assessment for the week. And I also followed up with these. So if I knew someone was struggling with something in their life, I'd like to take that little bit of extra time to email them and just check in with them in about a week to see how things are going. This can also stop small issues from becoming larger ones. So what assistance did I receive? Well, I am so lucky to have excellent TAs that really helped me through this transition and with a lot of the communication to students. They were excellent, and I was really thankful. I know not everyone has TAs, but to really help with some of those emails, to check in with students, to even remind them if they were falling a little bit behind. I have some of the best colleagues in the world, and some of them are on the call today. And it's so nice to be able to bounce ideas off of those around you, but also those in CEI. And I'm so thankful to have so much knowledge right here at the university. It really does take a village to move courses online, to really move through this in these unprecedented times. And lastly, I'm really thankful throughout my PhD program, I learned how to teach, which is not often seen in PhD programs. And I also had the opportunity to teach online throughout my time at UB, at least one course. And so I really felt that I was ready to make that transition and excited about online learning. But even with that, there are challenges that spring up here and there and really make you think about your teaching philosophy and where you want to go and how you want students to perceive you and what you're offering them. So from a faculty perspective, I'll tell you, I am not the most organized person, and I'm working on it. We're all working on something. And so structure was something that was more challenging for me. But it really brought up this idea of transparency, and it really helped me to figure out time management. I knew what students were going to be turning in, how much time it was going to take them, and with those assessments, that helped me plan out my week to provide assessment to them, to provide feedback to them on their assessments. And so the structure not only helps students, but it can also help faculty. And when I talk about transparency, I think some of our other presenters have brought this up. It's really important to have students understand why they're doing what they're doing. And so if I want students to write a paragraph reflection, I'm going to tell them why I want them to write that paragraph reflection and how that's going to tie into what we're going to do next in the course. And that really helps them in connecting the information. With flexibility, you know, having this challenge of moving online quickly really changed my ideas around due dates. And listening to others in similar circles really had me thinking about, why do I have to have it due at that specific time on that specific day if I'm still grading? And if that 2 days really helps a student to reduce their stress and really be healthy and create some space for them to be healthy, why would I not do that? It also opened more communication. Often, even though I didn't ask students to tell me that they were using a 2-day grace period, most of them emailed me and said, hey, I'm using this 2-day grace period. Here's what's going on in my life. And I just wanted you to know, I really appreciate this extra time. And to me, that's really important. I want to know what's happening within my students' lives. I want to know how I can help. It also increased trust, right? And trust is something I'll talk about in a moment. It's almost a currency in your course. The more students trust you, the more they will be willing to do some of these crazy activities, like write a textbook. And showing kindness is important, right? Being kind to one another is something that students don't always get in their courses. I know if you're on this call, you're probably in the camp of kindness and caring, but not everyone is. And so you never know how that little bit of space that you provide to students can really help them in the future. So from students' perspective, I had a lot of happy students that they could flex some of these deadlines. Overall, there was a lot less stress for everyone. It was a little bit challenging to track some of the due dates at times and really follow up, but students were very good at holding themselves accountable to whatever date they created. It increased communication between the students and I. It increased that trust that I like to talk about as currency. And it helps students actually plan for other courses. So if they knew that they had 2 hours of work in my class one day, they could kind of think about what other assignments they had to do in other courses. Or if they had a big test coming up that they were pretty nervous about, they could shift their deadline slightly to allow them some space to feel more comfortable with that upcoming test. So what was the most surprising outcome? Well, you know, I'm always impressed of how 2 days or very little flexibility can really increase students' perceptions of your caring towards them, and also that you know that we're all human, right? And a little bit of structure can also help. I think one of the biggest feedbacks from my course evals were, this is the most organized online course I have ever been part of. And I'm thinking, wow, they don't know me very well. But I'm glad my course came off as structured. And I'm glad that that little bit of flexibility helped them as they were going through these really challenging times to be able to not feel like they were always behind or always in stress. And I would say flexibility builds interest in the currency of caring, right? The more students feel that you care about them, the more they're willing to work hard and be engaged in your course. Everyone wants to feel that they're cared about. And taking a little bit of extra time to be flexible or check in with your students can add up in many, many ways. And it helps build relationships with your students. Ultimately, we're here to create the next generation. And I want that generation to be kind and caring to others. And life skills are often built into lessons in the classroom or online, right? Although some people will argue deadlines are set for a reason, you must reach them. I agree, the CDC is not going to change the grant deadline for you. But by creating communication skills and recognizing that you might be a little bit late on an assessment, I think that communication skill is invaluable. Being able to recognize that you have too much on your plate and ask for help, I think that's also a valuable lesson. So as you're moving and preparing for remote teaching, I think it's important to really be human. I make mistakes all the time in my courses, whether it's having a due date that's slightly shifted because I was looking at last year's calendar, or if it's forgetting to post my online lecture because it's set to not show up yet, right? Note that you're human. Let students know that you make mistakes in videos. I never edit my videos because I feel like if I'm not comfortable with that, how are students ever going to be comfortable with having minor issues in life, right? So being human is important, and showing students that you're human is important. Be kind. I sometimes hear faculty have almost this adversarial relationship with students, but in fact, we were all students once. I'm a first-generation college student who actually had to work all through my undergrad, grad, and PhD program. And so I find myself being very empathetic to students who have those other outside commitments. And this is where a lot of my policies come from. You also have to find what works for you. And as other presenters have said, be true to yourself, be true to your teaching philosophy. To me, kindness and caring and really having students feel like they can achieve and empowered is something that's really important to me. And so I want to build that into how I treat my students, whether it's in the syllabi or within the course. I also really think it's important for transparency. Having students understand why they're doing something. They're not just writing a paragraph to write a paragraph, but they're writing a paragraph that's really flowing, that's really articulate, that they could use being a future public health professional, or insert the other disciplines that you may be teaching. And flexibility is key, right? We didn't expect this to happen when it did. We don't expect life to happen, whether something in your own life or your student's life. So having that flexibility and being able to shift, I think, is a skill that we can all become more comfortable with after this pandemic. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for that presentation. So what struck me a little bit about your presentation was how much of it kind of wasn't about teaching. It was about empathy and caring, and you kind of used the terms, you know, interest in the currency of caring and building life lessons into courses. So for faculty who certainly feel that way but have never incorporated those kind of things into their classes, what are the baby steps they could kind of start with to do some of that stuff?
I think figuring out a policy that works for you. Some people are not comfortable with allowing students to submit late work, as some would say. Uh, I find it to be something that really doesn't bother me because I'm still grading after 2 days with the amount of students that I have. And so helping to figure out what works for you, right? Examining why you have the policies that you do, and why you might want to change those. For some people, it might not work for you because of your program. I don't budge on quizzes because I worry about academic integrity, and I don't budge on discussion boards because I think it's unfair if students are not contributing to their fellow students during the specific time frame. So really examining some of your policies and how you word information. Words matter. And that can be a start to how you move forward.
So I would like to think that 100% of your students, were honest about things and they appreciated that kind of flexibility and understanding. But I'm assuming there's some kind of balance between that flexibility and having students take advantage of that understanding. Did you ever run into any of those issues?
In a perfect world, we wouldn't have to worry about that, but we know there are challenges with everything. And so I did have a few students who tried to continue to push for an increased deadline. And I said, you're the one who made this deadline. It's not me setting the deadline for you. So you needed to meet what you said, and setting expectations and having clear expectations is important, right? Because you will have students who will try to push those boundaries. But I try to make it clear of where I'm willing to budge and where I'm not willing to budge, and setting those clear guidelines so that it's fair for everyone, I think is important if you're going to adopt a policy like this.
And I think you may have just answered the question that popped up, which was, did you find a large number of students creating their own deadlines, or did it seem to be only used when they absolutely needed it? Was there a percentage of students who took advantage of it, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, it depended on the class. My one class of graduating seniors, almost everyone used it at some point in the semester, which was 17 in that class. Some of my larger classes of like 87 students, I had a handful or so use it. So I think it depends on what sort of projects or assignments that you have within your courses. For the seniors, they had a larger writing assignment, and so they used this to manage some of the stress that they had around their other courses, but also to put some more effort into their assignments. And that's one benefit of this, is students have the time to not throw it together at 11 p.m. They can really take those extra days, and you do see the difference in the quality of the work by allowing them this flexibility.
Yeah, which is the point, I suppose, right?
Exactly.
We have a question about accessibility perspective, and were there any particular issues in that area that you ran into or you needed to do any additional adjusting?
Yeah, so this is one thing that is always on my mind, especially when I create fancy graphics using Canva or other tools around scheduling. I like to also provide a Word document that's accessible for any of those fancy graphics. With Google Docs or Google Forms, I haven't seen any accessibility issues, but I'm also trying to evaluate all the tools that I use because Padlet can have some accessibility issues, and some other tools can be more challenging to use. But I'm thankful that many of the departments at UB are really willing to listen around what sort of technologies faculty are using. You heard from our expert panel about examining some of the tools and really making sure that those are accessible, and the ways that you present information are also accessible. The Ally tool is excellent, and that also helps when uploading content to UB Learns.
Yeah. I think one of the concerns a lot of faculty had going in from face-to-face to online learning was student engagement. So we have a question here asking if you have specific techniques or tips that you've applied to your online courses to increase authentic student engagement.
Yeah, I think variety is the spice of life for students in online courses. If you have a discussion board every week, although that will provide them some structure, that might not be always the most fun activity for them. And so really creating varied activities for them to engage, I think, is important. For me, the optional meetings in some of my courses was that way to engage students who really wanted to talk. Whereas other students had to work or had other engagements. You know, I had some students who ended up having to go back to their home country due to COVID, and so they weren't able to make some of those synchronous meetings. But I gave them the option of doing a discussion board or doing an assessment that would reach the same learning objectives so that it was fair. I also like to send out weekly reminders, and I usually do it about twice a week. And as some of our other presenters have said, I call out students who do exemplary work. I say, you know, thanks, John, for really adding to the discussion board this week. Your information around the trans-theoretical model is really useful. Or even having them do some kind of non-conventional activities. My students will joke that they will need crayons or colored pencils for my course, because sometimes I actually have them draw out concepts and show the connections with concepts by manually drawing it and then uploading a picture of that. And so finding fun ways to engage students, Kahoot's another one, is not only fun for me to try to think about unique ways, but it's also fun for them. They know that they'll have an activity every week. They might not know what that activity is going to look like, but it'll be fun for them to try something new and learn about the content in a slightly different way.
Yeah. I think, you know, I think most faculty right now would probably say to themselves, I learned a lot and I'm a much better online teacher than I was or I thought I could ever be. But what lessons could they take from learning the online part of teaching? What can they carry over? What can they have they learned that they can carry over to classroom teaching when we get back to it?
That's such a good question. Good teaching is good teaching is good teaching. And the nice part about being in class is if I forget to remind students or tell them about something, you know, I can send them an email about it, or I can explain it, or I can look at their faces and see that they don't understand it. The online world is a little bit different because you really have to have that structure ahead of time. You have to know what you're doing, you have to know where you're going, and you have to create a roadmap for students to get there. There's a lot more explaining in online courses, whether it's how to use a tool or what you expect in their upcoming assessment. And so by taking the time to really scaffold and think about where you want students to go, I think that makes you a better teacher in the classroom by helping you to know where you're going, how you're going to get there, and making sure that students are on the same page, right? Many of our students come from a variety of backgrounds, and we really want to honor where they are and help them to get to that next level after they're finished with their course.
Yeah. I have one last question that popped up about what didn't work. What did you find out that didn't work that you had to adjust?
Oh, so many things. There's always challenges.
We'll pick the top one or two.
My biggest complaint was trying to have students do presentations with other students on a variety of papers. We had challenges with settings and Google Slides to making sure students could hear the embedded audio. And group work is inherently challenging in an online environment when everyone has different schedules. And so I really had to go back to the drawing board on a few of those. But the nice part is because I built up that trust and that rapport with my students, they really were okay with it, right? They realized that I didn't intend for this to blow up, and they were really kind when I said, okay, you know, this isn't working. let's go back and try this a slightly different way. And they were pleased with the revisions. And by continually checking in, I knew where they were frustrated. So if they're frustrated with a tool or they're frustrated with an assignment, I could revise that. And you know, those changes and those iterative changes, you see students that are so grateful that you're listening to them. And so I think really listening to your students can help you find some of those challenging areas and think about how to solve them for the next semester.
Yeah. Well, Jessica, it's always a pleasure to see you and hear what you've been up to. So on behalf of all the participants, I just want to thank you again for joining us and sharing your experiences with us today.
Thank you.